Hello, everybody. This is G, and you're listening to the SITREP podcast, your home for everything modern military wargaming. And today at the command table, besides myself, there is Ralph from England.
Hey, folks.
And Jim from sunny Florida.
Hello, everybody.
Do you actually have sun? Because I haven't seen the sun in a week up here in the Great North.
It is absolutely gorgeous outside. I'm going outside as soon as we get done with this podcast.
Sucks. All right. So we appreciate you all joining us for this episode of the SITREP podcast. We're going to just talk about anything related to modern military wargaming. And with that, I thought I'd start off with Jim. And Jim, have you been doing any kind of hobbying or wargame-related activities?
Yeah, a couple things. I've been still chipping away at my silly little Halo guys. Those are those Halo Mega Blocks, whatever they are. They're basically like a Lego off-brand. They're actually pretty fun to paint, and because they're so cheap, and they're big. They're probably like 45 mil if they were miniatures, which of course they really aren't. So they're kind of fun to paint, and you get like these weird, goofy colors and clear plastics and all this stuff, and it's fun to try and salvage them. Like, can I turn this into like an actual, thing? Get a bunch of wooden bases, printed out a bunch of like sci-fi, like deck armor, like sci-fi texture skins or whatever.
Okay.
Use that as like a rudimentary base or whatever, paint the rim black. And for the amount of money that I'm putting into these, like $3 a figure, $4 a figure, they're coming out pretty good. I don't know what I'm going to do with them, but they've been fun. They've been fun just to keep my brushes wet, so to speak.
There you go.
Which is really all I have time for. I haven't really gotten into too much more large projects. There's a few I want to get to, but it's just been a lot of online stuff. Obviously recording podcasts. On top of that, we have Op Center episodes that have been going up recently, and weekend wargaming. Well, we do every weekend with people from the community. So we had 2 games this weekend. We had 2 games the weekend before that we had 2 games. And it's been busy. It kind of eats up all your time, but it is still wargaming and chucking dice. So it's the reason you build miniatures is to play war games. So.
And exactly, yeah. And I think your weekend wargaming, where you put all that work into doing it, so people can join you from anywhere in the world, is truly amazing. So we all appreciate the hard work you do on that. So.
It's a lot of fun. It's not really modern wargaming, but Darkstar we've been playing. We've played Darkstar in, literally all over the world. Hello, Internet. China, Australia, Canada, Puerto Rico, all across the U.S., Ireland, Germany, the UK. We've been everywhere. It's just, whether or not you can, convert it somehow to where you can play digitally as opposed to, actual pieces on a tabletop. Obviously, we did Air War C-21 a couple weeks ago for the Falklands, you and I. Today, hopefully, of course, this will have either happened or not happened by the time this podcast goes out, but we're trying to do Naval Command for the Falklands with Dylan over in Australia. So we're going to see if we can take another game system for the Falklands and make that run at a slightly, higher level of, command level or whatever. The map is an inch to a nautical mile, and it's a 6x4 table, so it's 72 miles by 48 miles is your space. And it's these are the kind of games that you would never get to play, like maybe once a year at a boot camp, with people literally all over the world, and with thousands of dollars in airfare and hotels and aggravation and everything else like that. So we're trying to get it to where, people can, we're a wargaming community, and, so why don't we, get together once in a while and play war games?
Exactly.
The boot camps are amazing. I've been to 3 of them, but not everybody can always get to them. Not everybody wants to get to them. They're, it's a great deal, the boot camp itself, but depending on where you live in the world, it can be very expensive just to get there. So, we're trying to come up with some alternatives for that. And so far, it's been working great.
Yeah, it's almost like a virtual boot camp. So.
Yeah, I was actually calling it that when I first rolled it out, and I didn't know if that was going to get under some people's skin or whatever. So I changed it over to like Ariskanes Weekend War Games or whatever. Yeah. But at first, I was calling it like Ariskanes Weekend Boot Camps, and I was like, it's not really a new game, and I don't want to steal anything from the boot camps that they run over there in Ireland. So I was like, I'll just leave it as like weekend war games or whatever.
Awesome. Very cool.
And then last weekend, not really war gaming related, but they had the Air and Sea show here in Fort Lauderdale. That's the reason I was off the grid last weekend. And that was a blast. They had an F-22 there doing its demo. I've got some video of it. I'm going to try and splice it together and upload it to YouTube.
Nice.
F-22s, the Blue Angels were there. They had a C-17 Globemaster there. And I was a little disappointed, but they did have a pair of A-10 Warthogs there. Or Thunderbolt 2s, actually. They didn't really do a full demo. They just did like literally a flyby.
Oh.
And I was like, wow. I missed it the first day. It's a 2-day show. They basically repeat the show on Sunday. Because I thought I had the camera ready, and then they zoomed by, and I was like, okay, they're getting set up. No, that was literally the whole show.
Oh, really?
I was a little upset about that. But hopefully, thankfully, on the next day, on the Sunday, I knew what was coming. And we had lookouts for it, and so we got some video of it the second time around.
So no big gun run, huh? Down the ocean or something?
No, I was waiting for him to strafe that line of yachts and boats and $10 million pleasure craft out there. That would have been fun, But no, I'm disappointed again.
Oh well, what are you gonna do?
Yep.
Awesome. Ralph, what about you?
I'm working through my Spectre Spetsnaz at the moment, so getting those out the way. I've got 5 of them done, based and fully painted, ready to be basically varnished with a satin varnish and then a matte coat over the top just to double protect them. And then I've got the other 7 painted with primed black. I've painted the faces in, and I've just gone over the bodies with I'm using Stevens off Spectre's multicam guide.
Yeah.
So I've got them all based, the prime black, and then I went over them all with some grey-green.
Nice.
Or green-grey, whichever one it is. It's one of the two. I think it's the green-grey. Ready for the rest of it. So that's a 12-man Spetsnaz unit. I got 2 extras because I got my replacement. I had a problem with my Baba Yaga that I'd ordered.
Uh-oh, what happened?
When it came out, the mould part of the gun was missing off the pistol.
Okay.
So I contacted Jess and contacted Spectre, and they sent us to another one, and I'd, of course, dropped one of my Spetsnaz as well, the one with the backpack and the MMG.
Oh.
And completely wrecked the gun, snapped it partially and all sorts. So I had to get a replacement one of them. So I decided to get a Spetsnaz with an AT, an anti-tank, like the RPG that I have.
Uh-huh.
And the one kneeling down with the grenade launcher as well. So I've got a 12-man Spetsnaz unit. I found as well, painting them, really nice to paint, but I found a much better way than using Vallejo gun, because I normally done the weapons and gun metal.
Yeah.
I've been using grey-black.
Okay.
And then going over with null oil.
Okay.
And it just dulls them down completely, and it just makes them look a bit less shiny.
Yeah.
Because I think with the gunmetal grey and stuff, it's just way too shiny.
Yeah, it's a little too much on the silver side, I think, personally.
Yeah.
What I've been doing is I will use it like a gunmetal, and then I will shave a graphite pencil, and then I dust the graphite over the metal parts of the weapon, and it gives you that worn metallic you will see on like magazines and barrels and stuff from the bluing wearing off. So it's very subtle, but it does do a nice effect. So
I found the grey black with the gunmetal over the top, with the null oil over the top, just completely dulls it down.
Okay.
And really does work, and it also darkens it as well. So you get the grey and black, but then when you add the null oil, it's darkening it as well.
Yeah.
But I've been doing the gloves as well with that as well. So
nice.
They've got black gloves over the holding them, and the optic, because these are the ones that I chopped a bunch of the Emperor's heads to get the single optic. That was on a couple of the pictures I saw for the Spetsnaz. So all of the Spetsnaz have got the single optic on their helmets as well.
I see. Okay. Another trick I do is I will mix a little bit of a dark wash, like a nun oil, with some blue wash, almost a 50-50, and use that, because then it gives, when you look at a blued barrel, for anybody who's not familiar with the term, blued is the treatment they give to metal on weapons. There is a slight of a bluish black depending on how it is in sunlight or light. So this kind of helps replicate that instead of it just being totally black. So between that and the graphite, I think it does a really nice job.
Yeah, and I mean, I've got the ready. Once I get them out of the way, I've got my Tiger primed and ready. I've got a bunch of AK interactive paints as well to try for airbrush and for brushing. So I've got 2 sets of the Russian paint sets to paint this Tiger with, and then also the T14, which will be built eventually. Non-related moderns, I succumb to Jerry's spiel about Saga. So I got a copy of Saga and I got a copy of Age of Magic.
Oh yeah, so you're gonna take the dive into fantasy, huh?
Yeah, I don't have a fantasy army anywhere, so possibly going to go into fantasy, and I got myself the Kings of War Orc on Wings Stalker to paint up, so that'll probably be the Warlord. So it's a nice mini actually. It's a nice piece of resin.
Yeah, you know what? It's a nice to have a diversion. You know, you can't mold yourself into just one genre, because then after a while you're like, you know, it's nice to have some other outlets.
And then, of course, this past week or the week before, it would have been the week before, Protoss, as we all sort of saw within that community, no longer have the Aliens versus Predator license.
Yeah.
It shall we say, it ended at the end of April, so they were selling off all of their stock. So I managed to get a bunch of the aliens I was missing and things like that. So I've got a pile of them in a box with the rest of the AVP stuff that I will eventually get around to paint. This is all the new stuff as well, so it's all the unicast.
Nice.
So it's not the single, you know, the multicast which they did where you had to make them up, which was first edition.
Yeah.
This is all the unicast on bases, Predators, Aliens, Will and Utari Marines and all sorts. So they're all sitting there. So that's they're
actually nice minis. We got a copy of the second edition AVP, so I don't think we've ever played it, but you know, we got it at Adepticon a couple years ago when Protoss was there. So
yeah, but there is a new game coming out.
Yeah, but it's not.
Gale Force have got it.
Yeah, Gale Force.
Yeah, I'm not a fan of the minis.
No.
Not a fan of the aliens. I think the Protoss minis were better. But you know, I've also got the war game rules, which I think is based on Warzone. On the Warzone rules that Protoss do for was it Mutant Chronicles. The AVP war game rules are based on them.
Oh, okay.
So they did a war game version as well. So, but it's just nice to have these extra minis sitting there, because there's been a lot of IPs that seem to have gone war game and then disappeared. River Horse changed their Terminator game by the looks of it. It's gone to board game now, hasn't it? Really, compared to the original.
I think the original war game version didn't do very well.
No, I've got a copy sitting on my shelf.
I think you know, board game versions do much better than war game version. You know, especially when it comes to movie IPs.
Yeah.
So in movie IPs, it's such a tricky thing because you know you only get licensed for so long, and you know, depending on the IP, it's only popular and you know when like a movie comes out or something, and then you make this huge investment, and then the interest of it wanes and it falls off. So it's a tricky thing. You know, obviously Star Wars is one of those exceptions, but you know, you think about it, you know, like Terminator when the movie was out was very popular. Now you know it's like you know. And then Aliens versus Predator, or any of the, I mean, they've done Aliens to death personally, I think, you know, so, you know.
There are some IPs that are much wider or they have a much longer run. So Star Trek, Star Wars are good examples of
Lord of the Rings.
You can buy IPs and like if you were going to war game with it, you could war game with it for 10 years and not get bored with it. You're still going to have new things. Things like Aliens, how many times can you yell get to the chopper before it gets old? You know, I mean, like Transformers or, you know, these movies are maybe not that good to begin with. Like maybe like the first two were good, or Terminator 1, Terminator 2 were good. Predator 1, Predator 2 were pretty good. After that, they went straight in the toilet. Terminator hasn't been good in a while. Yeah, I mean...
it's an interesting one. I mean, I'm wondering... Sorry, Jim. No, it's just a thought here as well as... We all know Night Models. No, this is completely off our normal topic, but we all know Night Models has DC and Harry Potter.
Yep.
And they did have Marvel. They had the Marvel license as well to produce Marvel miniatures because their Hulkbuster was an absolutely gorgeous piece of metal as a kit. I'm wondering if they are now regretting the decision to go with DC.
Oh, don't start that argument. Let's not start the DC versus Marvel universe.
It's not an argument. I'm just wondering if they are when you look at what Marvel, especially in the cinematic universe, has just accomplished with Endgame.
Yeah, no, I agree, but that is like you don't want to get those.
No, we don't want to go that. But I'm just wondering if it is, from a business point of view, whether they now look at the decision to stick with DC. And granted, yes, DC has the TV and all the elements there, and DC is popular. But when they look and they think, we could have had a huge range of miniatures based around Endgame and Infinity War.
But the question is, did they have a choice? Maybe Marvel came back and said, we want you to pay this much more money for the license in Night Models because we can't afford it. And
I think it was part of the agreement with Warner Brothers to get Harry Potter.
Yeah. So
because Warner Brothers owns DC, it's part of the Warner Brothers brand.
Yeah. So I mean,
Disney owned Marvel, Warner Brothers owned DC, and I think it was part of the agreement from what was said in the community. But it's just an interesting
It is.
Question, because if you look as well, Night Models used to do like Stormtroopers and a lot of that stuff when they weren't concentrating on their two core games. You also did a collection of 75mm Special Forces in metal.
Oh, really?
Large size figures, like 3-ups. And they had a C. I think they had a SEAL. They had an SAS. I think they had Delta, and they disappeared once they started more and more churning out their other stuff. They had Lord of the Rings as well. They were doing Lord of the Rings miniatures. It's interesting.
All right.
Little side.
Yeah.
But that's it. That's been it for me and hobby.
Okay. Well, let's see. For me, this morning I'm all fired up. I've had 2 cups of Lifer juice, so I'm ready to go for the day. That's coffee for non-military types. What have I done? Well, I did the live stream the other night. So, Jim, how did the 2-camera work out? It's hard for me to tell from my side.
It looked pretty good. I was only on my phone, but it did look pretty good.
Awesome. Okay. So I painted up one of the Mena guys from Spectre Miniatures. I just have to finish his weapon. He has an AK-47, and then I worked on one of the Ultra Combat modern Russian Federation troops from Dish Dash, and they're really nice. I like those miniatures because they're beefy. When you hold one, you feel the weight of it. So it's definitely, would I say heroic scale 28 mil? Looking at it compared to Spectre or their regular skirmish handgun, I would have to say, it's more on the heroic scale.
So more like White Dragon and their miniatures.
Yeah.
Because they're the White Dragon ones, which are really nice, especially the ones that they're churning out for the Brits and stuff. They, I think, got shall we say, slightly heroic scale as well.
Yeah. I'm looking at the one I painted versus one of Full Battle Rattle's miniatures, and I mean it's a subtle difference, but it definitely looks a little bit bigger, bulkier. Which is nice because it paints up nice. But you know what? I think it lends well to the rule set that's coming out. So because it's going to be that card-driven, fast play skirmish game. So, but they are very nicely detailed. It painted up really nice. So,
So what colours did you do? Did you do them in camo, or are you just doing it straight?
No,
Russian
I did
green
it in. I'm trying to remember who said. I think it was Skoback suggested the Russian camo, which is basically just greens and browns. There, there's no black in there, which I was surprised at. I didn't realize there wasn't any. So, that's kind of what I did it in. This Russian camo.
I've gone multicam on mine, but I don't think it really matters on my Spectre, on my Spetsnaz.
To be honest with you, at 28 mil, most camo after you get done, unless you really do high contrast, it kind of all looks the same,
Yeah.
But no, it turned out well. I like it. So that's what I worked on, and I still need to get the Razor finished, and I still have the patrol boat I have to finish as well. I kind of got roped into a separate project yesterday, speaking of Harry Potter miniatures. For Christmas, Dawn got the entire collection, and that came out at that time. I think she's behind a few releases now, but I've been teasing her about, hey, you need to start, because she has the full Harry Potter collection. She got the full Twisted collection from the Kickstarter, and then she got, I think, the full collection from Moonstone Kickstarter, and it's all just been sitting here. I'm like, are you ever going to paint this stuff and do something with it? Well, and I said, look, I will paint one miniature to get you going. So she gave me Hermione, and I painted that yesterday for her. So that's
awesome.
Yeah, so I worked on that. I've been really itching to get out a traditional classic, I don't know what the proper term is, war game. I almost pulled out Squad Leader. I might do Devil's Den.
There you
go. Just something like that to play. So, which got me to thinking, and something you said, Jim, when we seriously have to have a discussion about a war game weekend, almost like a boot camp, where we can do a combination. We could have like some Spectre games going, maybe some skirmish or Ultra Combat, and have some classic wargaming going on. If we do a Friday, Saturday, Sunday thing, and that way everybody can get exposed to all those things, because there's some really good games out there, obviously the classics, and then there's a couple new ones coming out that, I think people would really enjoy as well. So it's just, I think part of our responsibility is to expose people to games that they have not considered before, or maybe have thought about trying and just, didn't want to invest the money into it, or, I don't know. It's just one of those things where I really enjoy some of the classic type games,
They're better. They're just straight out better. I mean, that's no big secret. When it comes to these more modern, or I say modern, more recent, I guess I should say, more recent miniature-based games, I mean, there's nothing wrong with them, but let's face it, half of the hobby is painting the miniature or building the model and, building the terrain and things like that. And there's, obviously nothing wrong with that, but that only leaves 50% of your hobby volume, for lack of a better word, to go into the actual game itself. And I know I always beat on the hex and counter drum. It doesn't have to be hex and counters. Air War C21 is not hex and counters. A lot of games, and when I say computer games, not video games, and yes, there is a difference. You can run the computer, you can run Harpoon, GDW's Harpoon. We're doing Naval Command later today. These aren't just hex and counter games. These are also just straight out, they're war games. I don't want to call them board games because they're not, Parcheesi or Chutes and Ladders or anything like that. You technically do play them on a board, but they're not, Monopoly. These are, I guess you could almost call them pure games because there's no miniatures, there's no terrain, so 100% of your gaming volume, your expense, your storage, your money, your, intellectual investment when, oh my God, look at all these rules I have to learn or whatever. All of that gets dumped straight into the game itself. And so a lot of what other hobbyists might spend on building a miniature, painting a miniature or whatever is here being spent on research, being spent on on rules design, learning rules that are probably a couple clicks. I don't want to say better, but but they're just more in depth.
Yeah.
That quite frankly, a miniature game often, again, this is no kind of a slam on miniature game, but miniature games just don't have the room for lack of a better expression. Because you've already spent X amount of time. The amount of brain power that goes into properly painting a miniature is tremendous. What paints do you use? What technique do you use? What kind of brush or whatever? You have to go out and get an airbrush. How does that work? Put that together. By the time you get through all that, do you really want to sit down with Rise and Decline of the Third Reich and play, War and Peace with your miniatures? Most people know they want to play, a more easygoing game. But by that point. And that's just a different way to experience the hobby. But yeah, these other games that you're talking about, there are some people that are trying to kind of revive the tradition, so to speak, with more recent Hex Encounter releases. But with the market being the way it is, these games I found are way I don't want to say simple, but they're very light compared to the old, 70s, 80s, and early 90s games. And they have to be because they have to, sell and make money and whatever. But I think that the catch-22 there is that when you have that kind of a light game in a non-miniature setting, you're almost throwing out the baby with the bathwater. I mean, you're giving away everything that's great about a miniature game, and you're not really investing in what makes a non-miniature game great.
Yeah.
So it's almost like you're getting the worst of both worlds, if that makes any sense.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I agree. I think when they create some of these newer games today, I think they're catering to the audience of today versus the audience of the 70s and 80s.
Well, absolutely, they have to. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, because there's the argument. Well, we have much more going on in our lives today than we did back then. Things are more complicated. I don't know if that's necessarily true. I think it's just we live a different lifestyle than we did back then. With the information flood of internet and everything. People multitask much, much more now than they did back then. I can remember, just from my point of view, from the late 70s and early 80s when we played a war game. We kind of did what you do now, Jim, with your online gaming. My uncle would come over when I was a kid to the house, and we'd spend a whole day playing like Panzer Blitz or something like that,
Yep.
Or if we did play miniatures, it was American Civil War on the basement floor, and it took all day. Half of the day was set up, and the rest of the day was, playing the game till 8, 9 o'clock at night. So, people, I don't think, really these days have that much time to invest outside of, like, game conventions and weekends, special weekends. But, if somebody wants to get in a game, they want to be able to do it in a couple hours at most. So I think the designers today are catering to that. So, I don't know. Personally, my opinion is I think sometimes people aren't getting the full experience when they have a game that they want to get over in an hour, hour and a half, 2 hours, versus some of those long, in-depth strategy games. But it's kind of an argument because while I'm talking about this, I'm thinking about my kids. My kids would spend hours upon hours playing a freaking video game.
Oh God! Yeah.
They would waste half their life playing a video game, but you talk to them about playing a war game, and it's like, well, how long does it take? It's just like I don't know. I'm not exactly sure what the difference is and why there is that delineation.
15 years I've been playing Warcraft.
Yeah.
Off and on.
Oh yeah.
That's a video game.
Yeah.
The amount of investment and time and stuff. I've actually the Hex Encounter stuff is interesting because I backed War in '85.
Oh,
which is I backed that. So that I think is due June, July. I know it's due this year. So I think that's going to be an interesting one because I'm on the community on Facebook and. The community is really great, and a bunch of people have been converting it to doing like almost 3D. So they've got the hexes are made. So they take all the hexes as you've got terrain in there, and they're using miniatures to denote the units. as well. So they're actually making it more like a 3D board game almost.
Nice.
Or 3D hex encounter thing. So that's an interesting one. And I think that, by the looks of it, yes, it's because there's a couple of they've been put some YouTube stuff out and some stuff on, some playthroughs of the game and some of the scenarios and stuff. And I think what they've done with that one, especially when I've just skimmed, I haven't really watched, is they've made the rules easier to understand. So there might be the depth of the old traditional ones that we talk about. Things not so much like Harpoon, but say like Squad Leader and things like that. But they've laid the book out in such a way so it's much easier to get into the game. With lots of pictures and information and things. So it's much easier to get over that barrier, and I think that's what part of the issue is with certain games, especially some of the older ones from the 80s and stuff, things that I remember, like Squad Leader, Advanced Squad Leader, Platoon, not Platoon, Harpoon, Air Superiority and things like that, and Gunship, which was an old West End Games one, was that barrier of looking at the rules and feeling daunted by them.
Yeah,
I am with you on Harpoon.
Mm-hmm.
I played Harpoon back in the 80s. And that game will teach you a number of very, very important lessons about naval warfare. Here's the thing about Harpoon. You'll pick up it's almost like Dark Star. Each ship has its own sheet of paper or whatever.
Yeah.
I mean, I know you know this, but just, for people who are listening, you pick up that sheet, and by the time, what do you normally do when you get a war game? What units do I have? And let's be honest. What's the first thing you look at when you look at what gun does this thing have? What's its attack value? How fast does it move? All the sexy stuff, I want to see its armor rating, all its combat movement, Michael Bay, boom, explosions, excitement, stuff like that. Harpoon, and by the end of your third game, you're asking two questions when you get a sheet. How many sensors does it have? And how many helicopters can it launch? Because that is 80% of naval warfare right there. It's all about electronics and it's all about helicopters. It's all about detection and extending the range of your eyes or whatever. Because that's a game that is brutally realistic. It's not one with torpedoes and bombs and rockets. It's one with sonobuoys. It's run with helicopters with air search radars and Hawkeyes and things like that. So that's one of the reasons that I kind of avoided it for the Falklands, because it's literally just too much. I know they came out with some, at least as a board game. Later on, they came out with it in computer, and I think it really found its niche as a computer game.
I remember
because the computer does most of the heavy lifting for you. So I went to this Naval Command thing from Rory Crabb, and I'm trying to make it work. I'm really trying. I'm trying, Ringo. I'm trying real hard to be the shepherd. But it's a little bit like Valor and Victories for Squad Leader. He's like, here's this great game from back in the day. How do we make this more accessible? And how do you do that? You have to take a chainsaw to it. And you have to start cutting big slices out of the rules and really, slimming things down. And after that, I think it's just a matter of personal preference as far as how much is enough, to cut things out of it. For our game of Modern Warfare, Naval Command later today, I had to put fuel back into the game because he didn't want to track fuel. He didn't want paperwork in his game. I have a computer. I can make it where you're not actually doing it with paperwork. But without even play testing it, I'm just looking at the size of the map. I'm looking at the helicopters. I'm looking at the Harriers. And even more importantly, I'm looking at the Argentinian aircraft, the Mirages, the Daggers, and the Skyhawks. And without a fuel mechanic, the Argentinians are going to win every single game because they have literally 10 times as many aircraft. And if they're not operating at the absolute very, very end of their leash, that was the whole point of the Black Buck missions. If they're not operating at the very end of their fuel range, if they get to just basically float on the table for the entire game, they're going to sweep it. So again, I'm not saying that did he cut too much out of the game in order to make it work, to make it more accessible for a modern audience. I don't know. That's again a matter of personal taste. I'm not saying that his rules are wrong by any stretch of the imagination. He does get some high level stuff very, very correct, but in this particular scenario, Argentinian fuel problems have to be part of the game, or else your game is either A, going to be unrealistic, or B, the entire Royal Navy is going to end up at the bottom of the South Atlantic in very short order. So you have to sort of engineer a little bit of that complexity back into it. Again, it's a matter of, either personal taste or just making the scenario fit the particular situation that you're trying to recreate. Would this work if, you're doing like a scenario out of Red Storm Rising? Yeah, because, the Soviets are there, the Americans are there, they both have carriers, everyone's got fuel, everything's fine. But in this particular case, I think we really had to put fuel back into the game, not as a disparagement of Naval Command, or modern games in general, who, some people will say are made too simple, too light, but it just has to be put into this particular situation. And as far as how simple a new, or almost, I keep saying the word modern, how simple a modern or recent game has to be with all the distractions we have in our lives today. Facebook, Twitch, Netflix, Hulu, Marvel, DC, everything under the sun. Nobody's got time, quote unquote, for an 8-hour war game anymore. Well, I guess that's just, a sad sign of the times. I think we really lost something there. And there's going to be a few candles in the darkness that really try to hold it out or whatever. And we are bringing a few people into that orbit with our weekend war games. Not that our games take 8 hours. But, we're always going to be the minority, I think, going forward. And that's okay, but again, it's not for everybody. So it's going to be, I keep saying this, it's going to be a matter of personal preference.
Yeah, I must admit, I'm looking at the Rory Crab. I'm looking at his Fireteam Modern rule set, which a lot of people seem to be using, or quite a few people seem to be using, especially for doing Chechnya. That seems to have regained traction again, doing stuff within, the Chechnyan war. We know Tiny Terrain's he's doing his own rule set, and he had his Kickstarters with the minis and stuff, and he's posted some pictures up on his Facebook page and on Spectre and a couple of the others with the table he had made, which looks really nice. Actually, it really does look a really nice gaming table. These aren't that expensive actually, the Fireteam Modern, so I may get them next month in PDF format and then just put them on my Kindle and have a read through them and see what I like.
Awesome.
Very cool. So just one last thing. So hobby-wise, this puts me outside of modern, but speaking of PC games, Jim, I have been playing one of my favorite PC games, which is Ultimate General Civil War. I don't know if you're familiar with that.
Oh yeah. Okay.
So that's kind of my go-to when I need that itch scratch. So I did the first Battle of the Bull Run yesterday. I tell you, that's a hard game. It is not easy by any means.
Were you okay, I'm trying to remember the generals now. Were you Beauregard, or it's not McClellan? Who was? Oh man, I'm totally spacing out on my roll here. Were you the Union or the Confederates?
I was the Union.
Okay, so what? It begins with an M. Who was the commander McClellan? There? No, it was another Mick, but it was it was a McClellan, McO'Neill, yeah. I can't remember the game. The name begins MC. I'm totally spacing on it now. Here we go.
I'm actually pulling it up as we speak. So let me.
Yeah. I feel like Morpheus in the Matrix. There's a splinter in your mind. I hate that. I know this, but I just can't pull it out right now.
Beauregard and. Come on now. And the other one is details. Okay, so
Winfield Scott, Irving McDowell.
McDowell.
Yep.
McDowell.
Yep, McDowell.
Yeah, Scott was the overall Army commander, the chief of staff.
And then Robert Patterson.
Yeah, so it's. I got to play that, and then I started dabbling into one of the other campaigns that they have, the Crossroads. I'm trying to remember the exact name of it, but it was kind of startling because I totally forgot one of the generals in that on the Confederate side was my ancestor. So I was fighting against my ancestor. So So it was,
Well, that's why you're having a tough time with it.
so yeah, it was. It's a really good game. I wish they would make a modern version of that game. But if anybody has interest in Civil War, it's really a good game, and I think you can play it against another person as well. So you can play player against player.
The trick for the Union at first Bull Run is to cut the Confederate rail lines.
Yeah.
That's the only way they won that battle. I mean, no disrespect to Thomas Jackson or anything, but that game was really won by the railroad.
So it's a good game. Speaking of PC games, Ralph, are you still doing Division 2?
I haven't been on for a while, but yeah, I'm still messing around with Division 2, and of course they announced the next Ghost Recon this past week.
Yeah.
Which does look really interesting. So I think I will be pre-ordering that one to see, especially the survival mechanic and stuff that they're putting into it. From what's been said, there's a lot of stuff come out since they did the launch. The trailer looks really nice. It also links back to the Ghost Recon Wildlands from a point of view of progression, and one of the characters you meet in the latest DLC mission. What they've been doing since Wildlands is they've been free DLC. So the first mission was Predator. You could actually fight the Predator. The second mission they brought out, which was Special Operation, was, for people that know, was Sam Fisher. So the character from Splinter Cell, voiced by Michael Ironside, the great Michael Ironside, was voiced by Michael Ironside again. And there's a little Easter egg where there's a reference to a Konami stealth character, which we all know. The third one was Rainbow Six Siege, so some characters from Rainbow Six Siege turned up. The fourth one was Future Soldier. The third one was Future Soldier, so that was one of the previous Ghost Recon games. The fourth one was Rainbow Six, and this new one is called Operation Oracle, and you meet another member of the Ghosts, and it's John Berthnell, who played the Punisher, who was Shane in The Walking Dead.
Oh, yeah?
He's in it, he's motion captured, and it's his likeness. That character is actually the lead villain for the new Ghost Recon, which is set in a few years in the future, and it's all to do with drones and that type of warfare. Basically mechanical warfare and drones, automation, things like that. So it's all to do with that technology, and you're on an island that's owned by a tech company that does that type of thing that's gone haywire. But what they're putting into it, they're putting in the elements of if you get shot and injured, and if you get wounded over time, it slows you down and things like that, and you have to bandage yourself, so that in survival elements you can create a camp and eat and drink and things like that to keep your stamina up and stuff. Because the idea behind it is, unlike traditional modern PC gaming of a military ilk like Ghost Recon Wildlands, like Rainbow Six Siege, you are no longer the hunter, you're the hunted. Okay. So basically the mission goes to hell, and you're having to survive behind, on these islands that are controlled by the bad guys who are actively hunting you. That's a brief snapshot of it, but yeah, it was sort of announced this past week, which I thought was quite strange, because we've got E3 in end of June, beginning of June, and that's normally when the big announcements get dropped. So I think Sony have said they're not going to E3 this year, so they have something called State of Play, which is their YouTube announcements, and they announced something that we talked about previously. There's a new Predator game coming out, where it's 4 people play Special Forces and 1 person plays a Predator.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, so...
It almost sounds like that Friday the 13th game that came out with a while ago. Yeah. It's an online multiplayer game. Everyone logs in, and a random person in your 8-man server or whatever is Jason.
Oh, really? I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. They're like 3 guys in, I don't know where they are. It's a tiny little team, put together this game, and it just, despite the fact that it had all kinds of bugs and problems and patches, because it's like a 3-man development or a 3-person development team. Mm-hmm. But Yeah, it was fun listening to some of the reviewers struggle with the term asymmetric. They didn't really know what it meant. They were like, "There's a term for this. I know what it is. I just don't know what." I'm like, "Oh, you guys are not watching the right podcasts." But then as far as E3 goes, yeah, more and more companies have been walking away from E3 lately. I mean, Nintendo walked away from E3 how long ago? 5 years ago?
Really?
Yeah.
Yeah, but they're going back this year.
They've been okay. Then that's something I didn't know. But for a while, they were running their own event. Everyone started running their own event because too many of these events, too many of the announcements that they've been making at these events have turned out to be, crap. I mean, No Man's Sky, Order 1886. I mean, people go, So you already know what I'm talking about. And people go crazy over these events and these announcements, and then the next year the game drops, and it's like, this is what you people were, shaking the rafters about. This is terrible.
The original Division game was shown at E3, and then when it got released, it was actually the graphics and everything were downgraded. And there's a distinct difference between the demo that you see at E3, which was probably a non-played demo. Right. It was a video demo compared to the game that we actually got in our hands.
It's basically a cutscene.
Yeah, it's a big on cutscene. The worst one that ever happened was when Sony dropped Killzone at E3, and you got this huge, immaculate, this sheer polished demo of Killzone 2 or 3, and then when the game dropped, it was like the difference was dramatic, and there was a huge backlash over that. That's why I think 2 years ago Sony had a live play of God of War when the new God of War came out, and there was a live play on stage of the actual game, and it was the game creator and the producer actually playing the game, because they've just dropped, and I watched it yesterday, and it's really interesting. There's a 2-hour documentary that Sony did filming the life cycle of the development of the new God of War. And it's got the E3 stuff in. It's got them, looking for the actors to play Kratos and the son and Freya and things like that, because the game was a huge departure from the original Greek idea. It's set in the Norse mythology.
They ran out of Greek gods.
He pushed them all in God of War 3. So they've moved them to the north, to Viking things. And I mean, the game looks pretty. I don't own a PlayStation 4, but it does. It looks immaculate. It runs at 60 frames, in 1080p and all of those, all of that thing, But it's an interesting documentary to see the life cycle of a AAA title that took them 5 years to develop. And
you should start streaming some of these video games, though.
I know I should, but gaming is, no offense to anyone, but gaming is my, it's one of the things I like to do and not so much share, even though I do play World of Warcraft and I'm in a guild. Not that there's many members of the guild online at the moment, because that goes to ebbs and flows and things like that. It's just something I like to forget about, not turn on Twitch to stream and just plug myself in if I'm going to kill things for half an hour to de-stress. So it's that type of thing. But I also like reading the internet, and there was a bunch of news that I think we can possibly chat about, Jay.
Yeah, why don't you start us off with that announcement that was made?
Well, there's the two announcements. There's two things that I think our listeners would be interested in. War bases in the UK who do MDF terrain, they do counters, they do MDF bases to stick your minis on. They're bringing out a 20 and a 28mm version of Bin Laden's house and the whole compound.
Yeah. In
20 and 28mm. I asked when it was posted up. I dropped a message on saying, are they doing the walls and things as well? And the reply back was, yes, doing the walls, and they're doing all the sub-buildings as well. So from what I gather is you'll be able to get... I know there's a company in the US who's the one that I think we'll talk about in the next article about them doing the Hotel Olympia. It's the same company. Did a Bin Laden compound but there's an interesting one now that war bases are doing it, and they're based in the UK, and their kits are really nice. I picked up a bunch of their what they call modular kits, so that you can buy different bits. And I've turned one into a church to see if I could do it and things like that. Make it like a church that would sit in the middle of somewhere in Africa. That type of missionary thing.
Mm-hmm.
So there's no date yet, but they're doing it in both scales. And on the one that he showed, is interesting is a 20mm base will slot onto the balconies and stuff. Because it's with the images, it's got some balconies and stuff on there. So I'm assuming that'll be the same for the 28mm, which is quite good for me because I base all of my Spectre minis on the 20mm bases because I've got a load of the counters that they did, which were based around 20mm bases as well.
Nice.
So that was the first one, which I think is really interesting. The second one, of course, is there's a company, and I think they are American. I think it's GC Mini. I'll try and get the proper URL, are doing Hotel Olympia from Black Hawk Down.
Yeah.
In 20mm as well. Multi-level as well. Multi-level, you can take all the levels off. It's got the rooms divided as well. He's putting stairs in it and stuff like that. And that looks a really nice kit because he posted up a YouTube clip which I've shared to the community, and that was posted up on a bunch of the other sort of community websites as well. So it's interesting that they're creating these two, shall we say, iconic buildings, or infamous buildings, depending on.
So, what was the a unique announcement about the Hotel Olympic that he posted?
It was more the fact that it's come out of nowhere, because I didn't even know. But I know he's posted up and he's asked on a couple of the lists, he's looking for somebody to he'll send them one if they do reviews and things like that. So I don't know if they're getting a free one, or whatever's going on with that.
Yeah.
But it was just, I think from point of view of these two buildings, have sort of come out of nowhere. It's been on no radar. I've not seen anything. You would have thought, especially something like the Hotel Olympic or Bin Laden's compound, that someone like Foreground might have picked it up.
I talked to him about it. I talked to Big Ben about Mogadishu. I
know you did. But you would have thought, that it would have been, or someone like Blacksite.
Yeah.
A biggish company.
Yeah.
Not no offense, but not a small company that might not have a lot of the resources to put into doing something like that, because it will take up a lot of time, especially if you're doing it, especially with Bin Laden being in two scales. Yeah. And it's probably easier to scale up and down and things like that, but still to do something like that in two scales is it's an interesting. But then that leads it into, and the reason I think the Bin Laden one I noticed straight away is because that was linked on the Fire Team Modern, which is the Rory Crab rule set, and it's on their Facebook group.
Mm-hmm.
With some sort of pre-production shots. And the other thing as well, which we can come back to the building stuff, was, and I don't know if we covered it or not, but on the 26th of April, Spectre on their Instagram dropped 4 pictures of 4 greens. I don't know if we covered them or not.
I don't think so.
So there's 4 new greens went up on the 26th of April, and it's a collection of Special Forces by the looks of it. 2 are holding Chris Vectors, version 1, so the SMG Vector.
Okay.
2 are holding the Vector 2, which looks like an assault. Looks like a personal, a PDW. Or PWD, like the personal weapon.
Okay.
But they're up on their Instagram page as well, which is interesting.
So I wanted to bring up something. Christopher Moody on our Facebook page went into great depth about stuff we talked about in the last episode about both action Korea and going into Vietnam.
Yeah.
He just, I don't know if he's a subject matter expert in this, but I mean, he went into huge detail on a lot of stuff like French Foreign Legion versus the Viet Minh in North Vietnam in 48 to 52. Yeah, I mean, he he had a lot going on, and it was quite impressive to read through his stuff. So I just wanted to do a quick shout out to him and say thank you for all the contributions you did on the show. So got a lot of good positive comments. And speaking of positive comments, Jim, I thought maybe you could give us a quick synopsis of the Op Center that just dropped this past week for those who haven't had a chance to get an opportunity to watch it and maybe get their interest peaked so they go back and watch it.
Okay, so the Op Center is a series that we're doing here on the SITREP podcast, where what we're trying to do is take a wargamer's kind of a view, or a wargamer's focus on any conflict that has taken place after 1945. Basically, any modern conflict. 1945 is the benchmark that we're using because reasons. I won't take 20 minutes talking about why we picked that date. So we did 4 parts on the Arab-Israeli Wars. That went pretty well. It got a little bit stale at the end, but we did get through it. And then we switched over to the Falklands. And for the Falklands, so far we've had a pretty good response. So part 1 was basically an overview. Here's where the Falklands are, because believe it or not everyone knows. Here's what the war was about. Here's when it took place. And here's basically how it got started. Here's the opening moves that Argentina made and the opening moves that the British made. So that left us with, it was originally going to be a 3-part series. I got to the end of the air part and I was already at 20 minutes. And I hadn't even started naval yet. So I'm like, guess what? This is going to be a 4-part series now. So part 2 that dropped, at the time of this recording, it would have dropped day before yesterday. So part 2 is strictly the air operations part of the war. Now, I have to kind of put this in air quotes because anyone who's familiar with the Falklands War know that air, land, and sea operations were very tightly integrated. There's a lot going on where one affects the other. They're all, it's tough. It's like 3 different colors of water. It's tough to kind of separate it into 3 completely homogeneous blocks, so to speak. But we're doing our best, and part 2 was about air operations. So we talk about the initial air operations that took place in the Falklands War. This is the British trying to retake the Falklands, starting in very, very late April into May and early June of 1982. How small that war was from an air perspective. I mean, how tiny the British air presence there really, really was. And that's important from a wargaming perspective because, as you can attest, Gianna, when you play historical scenarios in Air War C-21, for example, you look at the victory conditions and it's like, okay, 1 Argentinian aircraft shot down, it's a draw. 2 Argentinian aircraft shot down, it's a minor British victory. 3 Argentinian aircraft, 4 Argentinian aircraft, maybe it's a major British victory. 1 Harrier shot down, all Argentinian aircraft shot down, it's an Argentinian victory. If 2 Harriers are shot down, doesn't matter how many Argentinian aircraft are shot down, it is a major Argentinian victory. And that seems like kind of wonky victory conditions. The British basically are not allowed to lose a single aircraft, while the Argentinians can lose them all day long. Well, it's because the British, between their 2 carriers, could only bring 23 Harriers down to the Falklands. They couldn't even have them all down there at once. Meanwhile, the Argentinians are walking around with 250 plus combat aircraft. It's like when you're playing the Israelis on the Golan Heights, or the Germans out at Kursk. If you lose 1 tank, man, you're in big trouble because the Russians are coming with 10, 20, 30, 100, 200 more. That same kind of logic applies to the British forces that are in action down there at the Falklands. So we talk about the Argentinian aircraft that were involved, their types, their strengths, their weaknesses. It's the Mirage 3EA, the Israeli Dagger. That gives you an idea of how desperate the Argentinian Air Force was in a lot of places. when the Israelis are giving away weapons. These are the Israelis who go around garage sales in 1948 and basically like steal, junked, and wrecked, the Shermans or whatever. When the Israelis say, you know what, we're kind of done with these. You can go ahead and have them or whatever. When there's it's third hand from the Israelis, it's kind of old. So that's the Mirage 5, in fact, the Dagger, as the Israelis called them. And the American Skyhawk, which everyone who's seen Top Gun knows what a Skyhawk is. Okay. So we talk about them. We talk about their strengths and weaknesses and like what missiles they were able to carry and the importance of technology. And then, of course, the British, we have the two kinds of basic Harriers that were there, the RAF version and the Navy version. The American missiles that really kind of made the difference and what helped really the British score this kind of a kill ratio. It was upwards of 10-1 overall for the conflict. And then you've got what the Argentinians were trying to do. First, interdict British air missions. We talk about the Black Buck 1 bombing mission that the Vulcans tried to do to start putting bombs in the Argentinian runways on the Falkland Islands. This doesn't quite shut down the runway in general, but what it does do is it pushes the Argentinian jet aircraft off of the Falklands themselves. Mm-hmm. So the Falklands are a couple islands like 400 miles off the coast of Argentina. An aircraft can maybe fly at this day and age about 500 nautical miles in a radius. So if you're the British and you're trying to come towards the Falklands to take them back from the Argentinians, your first problem is this big honking Argentinian Air Force base where Port Stanley Airport used to be. Because it's 500 miles out from there. That's 500 miles of Argentinian airspace that you have to fly through, and bombs and exocets and all other kinds of trash, ready to fly at you and start sinking your destroyers. You don't want that.
Right.
So the first thing they tried to do, and we talk about this rather extensively in the episode, was they tried to put some bombs in that runway. They're not going to shut it down completely, but if they can shut it down for a day or two, now that's going to allow Sandy Woodward and his task force, HMS Hermes, HMS Invincible, to get closer during that crucial 24 to 48 hours, and now launch more localized Harrier bombing strikes with cluster munitions on that airfield. The point is they want to stand on that airfield and keep it shut down, at least for jet-powered aircraft. And what this is going to do is it's going to force all the all the Argentinian Navy and Air Force planes to operate off the Argentinian mainland, which again is 400 nautical miles further to the west. So now it's almost like the Battle of Britain, the sequel, where, okay, the Germans have a lot more aircraft, but by the time they get over London, they have like 5 minutes of fuel. Whereas the British are sitting there with 2 aircraft carriers and they can operate over the skies all day. This was a big advantage that makes a big difference in a lot of the Air War C-21 scenarios. It's why we had to reintegrate fuel rule mechanics into our Naval Command game that we're going to be playing later today. And it's a big part of the British air strategy and how the whole air war dynamics took place over the Falklands. We talk about all that in the episode. And we also mentioned some of the other things that took place, specifically regarding to air operations, where we had some special forces action. We had a great callback episode. Now, we're going to talk about this in more detail in part 4, because it's technically a ground operation. But one of the very first things that the SAS ever did successfully, they had a lot of bad missions when they first got started, was back in 1942 when they launched a successful raid with the help of the LRDG, a successful raid on an Axis Air Force base in Libya. And this is right before the Battle of El Alamein, and it largely shut down the Luftwaffe and the Royal Italian Air Force over those battlefields during that crucial Battle of El Alamein. So the British have never really gotten away from that idea, and even in 1982, they're still trying it. And the idea is to drop special forces, that's either SAS or SBS, Special Air Service, Special Boat Service, guys onto enemy airfields in the middle of the night and have this, classic, Chuck Norris-style raid to blow up these airfields and blow up a lot of these aircraft before the battle gets started in earnest. So there's a few of those raids. There's one at Pebble Island.
Mm-hmm.
There were no jets there, so that's why it maybe doesn't get mentioned a lot of times when people talk about Black Buck 1. But it does shut down some propeller-driven assets. That's the Pucara ground attack aircraft or counterinsurgency aircraft. That was still pretty effective against British shipping. And some other smaller airfields around the Falklands, too. So we kind of, mention that because it's part of the air operations. But again, we're going to get back to it in more detail in part 4 because it's technically a ground operation. This is what I was saying when I was, mentioning that these air, sea, and land operations are so tightly integrated. It's tough to talk about one without talking about the other two.
Right.
But yeah, and we talk about the live stream that we had, G, where we played Air War C-21 live. We talk about some other scenarios that we played in Air War C-21, where Argentinian aircraft tried to bomb what they called the round table ships that were landing at Fitzroy. Mm-hmm. They call them round table ships. These were like converted civilian-ish troop landing ships because they're named all after Knights of the Round Table. They're not HMS. That's why they're not technically Royal Navy, I don't think. But there's Galahad. There's infamously the Galahad. Lancelot, and the rest of them. There's HMS Fearless. These really are Royal Navy ships. HMS Intrepid that did the initial landings at San Carlos. There's Argentinians trying very, very hard to bomb them, before they could drop elements of Gurkhas, Royal Marine Commandos, the para commandos are in there too. There's a lot, again, air, sea, and land. It gets very, very tough to kind of pull it apart. But yeah, these are the kind of things that we talk about in episode 2 of the Falklands.
Okay.
That went up. It's mostly the air operation, and then what we're going to do in part 3 is going to do the naval part of it, which is going to include the landings, which means a little bit of land power gets put in there too, land operations, and of course lots more Argentinian airstrikes on these ships. So a lot more air gets mentioned in there as well. And then finally, part 4, which I'm trying to have rolled out before the boot camp on June 7th over there on Tabletop, is the ground operations. This is once the air battle has mostly been fought, the air war never really stopped, and the troops have all been put on the ground. And now we talk about the actual ground battles. Goose Green, Tumble Down, Wireless Ridge, and Mount Longdon, the Two Sisters, all these battles. We got the Scots in there, Scots Guards, we got Welsh Guards in there, those that made it off of HMS Galahad. There was a big problem there. It's probably the biggest single loss of life that the British suffered in that conflict. We already mentioned Goose Green, the Battle of Darwin. There's a lot going on ground-wise. Still influenced by naval and sea operations. So again, we can never completely homogenize it, but we're trying to cover these 3 topics in these parts of the Falklands video series for Op Center.
Nice, excellent. That sounds like a big boatload of fun.
Awesome. We're halfway through it. We got 2 more to go.
Yep.
So stick with us, everybody.
So eventually, if we can get coordinated enough, when Jim has an idea for his future sets of programming, we're going to try and incorporate a miniatures-based scenario demo game or playthrough to coordinate with them. It's a lot of lead time to make sure we can get everything coordinated. So that's why we haven't done it up to this point. We've talked about it. It's one of those things that
we were talking about either a Pebble Island raid or a Goose Green or a Two Sisters or Mount Longdon one. That was like back when we were just starting this. It's 2 weeks per episode, and 4 episodes. So that's 8 weeks of lead time. But that still might not be enough because it is a lot of work to put together a miniature army. Yeah, and
we want to make sure it's done right. So
absolutely,
we don't want just cardboard boxes on a green felt mat. That just doesn't do it justice.
Well, if there was ever a time, it would have been the Falklands, because the terrain in the Falklands is ridiculously, well, I shouldn't say that. It's deceptively easy. Long story short, there's no foliage. There's no trees. There's no bushes. It's just basically grass.
Yeah.
Grass and rocks, but the rocks have to be done right, because it's like that prehistoric basalt or granite that kind of comes up out of the grass, and like those very almost volcanic kind of slats that you see in photographs, and those have to be laid out just right. It's actually tough terrain to build, and it's got to be done just right, because those were the only features. You know, it's like, how do you do terrain in a true desert tank game? It's not as easy as it sounds. You think, oh, just get like, you know, a pool table and spray it tan. You know, well, where's your hull down shielding? You know, when there's so little terrain, what terrain there is becomes vitally important, and you have to do it just right.
Yeah.
Whereas if you're in the Bocash country, throw up some hedges, throw up some bushes, throw up some trees, and a couple farmhouses and a cow, and you know it looks like northern France. When the terrain gets simple is when it actually gets tough. So the Falklands, as far as ground combat goes, and actually doing it in miniature, is, you know, 6 to 5 and picking them. It's either going to be the easiest table you ever built or the toughest table you ever built. Yeah, it's actually an interesting question.
Awesome. All right. Any final thoughts from everybody?
There was something else that I missed off the news as well. Back when Warlord were doing Project Z, they did a military compound in MDF. Yeah.
Yep.
Sarissa have taken that military compound because it was one of their kits, and it was branded for Project Z. Have now put it out as a kit by itself. It's called the Secure Compound Scenery Set. It's up on Sarissa's website.
That's the prison compound, like, right?
No, this is a modern one.
Oh,
you
okay.
get a warehouse, you get a helicopter pad which can be positioned on top of the warehouse or to the side. You get 7 walls with spotlights and a gate.
Oh.
It's called the Secure Compound Scenery Set in 28mm.
That could make a good raid.
Well, I originally saw it, and when I saw it in Project C, they had it down as a Special Forces compound, and I thought that would have been a great sort of. And I saw someone use it as this like a almost like a data center or whatever, and being protected by a bunch of Russians, and it was either Russians attacking it or Russians defending it against another collection like a Tier 1 force trying to break into it for some strange reason.
I see.
So my idea of a scenario where you're using the Spetsnaz to kick off, say, an invasion of some description, you could use it as a forward observation, like a forward observation base, or not so much a forward observation base, but like a forward communications base where that's controlling air defense for a specific key sector. And
you can use it as a CIA compound.
Yeah.
I'm looking at it right now on the Sarissa page, and well, not exact. You could almost use it for the contractors, the security contractors for a CIA off-books compound.
Yeah.
Almost like 13 hours. So, yeah.
Oh yeah. I mean, it's built. I know it's built. Looking at it, and if you look at the sort of the images and stuff, it's built for, shall we say, a World War Z, DayZ, that type of environment, you know. But it could be used for anything.
Oh yeah, definitely.
Really, but it's a nice collection. It's a nice kit, especially if it being done, you know.
It is, and honestly, the prices are not bad at all. You're
getting 7 wall sections, a gate, a helipad, and a warehouse, you know, and it's a two-story building as well.
Yeah, and it has an interior. It's not just a shell, so it's not bad at all. That would make a good. I'll have to look into that. That might make for a good scenario. So Sarissa is really coming on with some of their stuff.
The Sarissa stuff's really nice, and it's reasonably priced as well. Their Middle Eastern, their North African stuff is really nice that they've done. They've done let's have a look, see if I find it. North American, North Africa and the colonies, colonial. Yeah. So it's basically a collection of like there's an administration building, and then next to it for the same price you can get administration building destroyed. So it's got chunks of it missing and stuff. And they've done that with all of their sort of their bit scenery. I think it's predominantly to do it for North Africa, to do like Tobruk or El Alamein or, you know, World War II.
Yeah.
But it would work for any modern area as well. And then if you intermix that with the stuff, the south of the border stuff that they've got, so that's all the Adobe Mexican buildings. Well, they could be just Adobe buildings anyway.
Yeah.
But you could intermix it into that with, and then you've got your North African stuff, which could be some of the buildings, and then you've got your Adobe buildings, and then you've got your cartel type environment. That border town between Mexico and Texas, or that sort of area.
Yeah. There was another, I don't know if you guys saw the coverage when we were at Adepticon, but the Phalanx Consortium had this huge warehouse that you could pre-order. And I'm on their page, but I can't, it says the building, but it's not coming up. So I'll have to see if I can reach out to them and see what we can do about that. But it was pretty, there's so much stuff going on right now, terrain-wise. If you look on our page, Tiny Terrain has a whole Russia board set up, which is really impressive.
That's the one I was at about. That's for his Chechenian rule set. That he's doing his own rule set as well. Tiny Terrain.
So we'll have to see if we can get them on at some point. I know our friend Tim, which is now with Footsore Miniatures. They're Footsore Miniatures again, right?
I have no idea.
After the whole name fiasco.
War Banner.
War Banner, or whatever it was.
I have no idea what's going on with Footsore and War Banner and whatever the hell they're changing their name to, or what their name is. I don't think anybody knows apart from them.
Jim,
it was a mess.
I have a challenge for you for the next show. It's an easy one.
Okay.
I would like you to talk about a game recommendation in the classic games. It could be a newer publication or an older one, the Hex Encounter, that you would think is an excellent introduction game for somebody who may have never played that type of game before, and why. And it doesn't even have to typically be modern post-45. We'll even say 21st century. How about that? Will that make it easier for you?
I already know which one I'm going to do.
Okay. And Ralph?
Spoilers, it's not Panzerleader, so everyone just relax.
And Ralph, I have one homework for you too. Since you are the video game guru, along the same lines, what video game for somebody who's never played a video game? Now it could be a PC military simulation game like the Civil War game I spoke about earlier, or it could be something else. What would you recommend for somebody?
Steel Panthers. I'm just kidding.
I was going to say Close Combat. Do you remember Close Combat?
I do.
I love those games. Always played Arnhem. Arnhem was my favorite one. So
the thing is, there's so many.
I know.
There's the obvious one, which is the obvious one to go for, which people can probably think what the obvious one would be, but I wouldn't class it as a military game per se. Yeah. Well, I've got some ideas.
All right, so there's your guys' assignments. And then I am going to pick a miniatures rule set that I think is a good introductory rule set. So that will be our homework, and hopefully Chris will join us, and we'll get Chris on something as well. So any last thoughts before we close out the show for today?
No, I'm good.
All right, guys.
All good.
Well, thank you, everybody, for listening to the SITREP podcast. Of course, as always, we want to thank our Patreon supporters. Without you guys, we could not do what we do. So thank you very much. And one of the benefits that they're receiving right now is that they get early access to all our shows. So we're going to try and get those out even earlier for you guys. I know they went out a little later on Thursday. We're going to try and make sure that they're out by Thursday morning, so you have a full 24 hours before anybody else to enjoy the shows and comment on them. Still working on some swag for you guys as well, and anybody else who's interested in supporting us through Patreon, please visit our Patreon page at SITREP Podcast. And always participate in conversations and post things on our Facebook page. And until the next time, we will see you all later.